Hello and welcome. My name is Amit Kaushik, and in this session, I'm going to take you through some of the major developments that preceded the introduction of the Right to Education Act in this country in 2009. In pre-independence times, education was not something that was open to everyone. It was the preserve of an exclusive few. We had a Guru Ashram, Guru Shishya tradition where the Guru imparted his knowledge to selected students. And those students came from a particular strata of society. So it was either the Brahmins or it was the Kshatriyas who were taught how to rule, while the Brahmins learned, of course, about the traditional texts and the Vedas and the Upanishads. But the average Indian had very little access to what you might consider a schooling system. It's only after the British came to India and through the East India Company took over wide tracts of Indian territory that the question of education for the masses began to be discussed. In 1813 was passed the Charter Act, which is actually quite a landmark in the educational history of India, because it was enacted with the view to imparting modern education to India, to Indians. And the Act actually sanctioned 1 lakh rupees annually as a sum of money available for public instruction. Much of this money, unfortunately, wasn't spent because of a controversy over whether the education should be in English or it should be in Oriental languages, and which is commonly referred to as the Orientalist-Anglicist controversy, where the Anglicists basically wanted to discard existing structures of education, while the Orientalists argued for native language learning. We don't have very many sources of information about how and what were the decisions that were taken back then, but there were a number of inquiries on the state of education that were taken up in various parts of the country, especially in what was then called Madras and Bengal presidencies, such as the Adams inquiry into the conditions of indigenous education. In 1821, the Governor General in Council actually set up a General Committee of Public Instruction. One of the most famous developments around this time, which is discussed even today, was the famous Minute, the Macaulay Minute of 1835, written by Thomas Babington Macaulay. And while much has been said in criticism of the Minute, including the fact that he denigrated Oriental languages and made statements to the effect that a whole library full of Sanskrit and Oriental learning is not worth a simple book written in English, there was a certain logic to what was being tried through as a result of, or being recommended as part of that minute. One, in what I would call a fairly far-seeing conclusion, Macaulay pointed out that English was likely to be the language of international business and commerce for many years to come. Second, he pointed out that had the great works of Greece, which were written in Greek, not been translated into English, they would not have been available to the average common person. Third, Macaulay intended that by imparting public instruction in English, they would create a system or they would create an intermediate layer of people, brown in color, as he said, but English in their thinking, who would serve as intermediaries between the rulers and the ruled. And most importantly, it would be their responsibility to translate this learning, this public instruction, into the vernacular. And so eventually the Macaulay Minute envisaged that learning would be translated and made available to the masses through vernacular language, which is a conclusion very often lost in the criticism of this minute. Macaulay's minute was endorsed by the Governor General at the time, Sir William Bentinck, and subsequently in 1852 we had the Woods Dispatch, which provided for opening education departments in every province and at least one government school in each district. Now, this was a huge step forward because suddenly we were talking about opening public schools in every single district. The Woods Dispatch also provided for grants and aid to affiliated private schools, providing systematic education from primary all the way up through to university, and using vernacular languages as the medium of instruction at the primary level and English at the college or university level. It even talked about supporting the education of women, and in that sense was fairly ahead of its time. This dispatch had a significant impact on India because it led to the setting up of the universities of Calcutta, University of Bombay, and the University of Madras, which were all established as a result of the dispatch. However, there were complaints that the plan had not been implemented in its full scope, and therefore the Hunter Commission was appointed, which brought out the neglect of primary and secondary education and recommended grants and aid for indigenous schools on the basis of payments by results. And this is one of the earliest known examples of delivery linked indicators, if you like, which we hear about so much these days. This commission argued for transferring the management of primary schools to municipal councils and district boards, something that we in India only did through the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments much later. And also highlighted the need to address the lack of facilities for women's education and education for Muslims. Jyotiba Phule made a submission to the commission at this time and asserted the need for compulsory primary education, stressing the effects of illiteracy, especially on the lower castes. In 1901 was a national conference on education, which was convened in Shimla by Lord Curzon, and the conference adopted some 150 resolutions touching upon almost all aspects of education. The government actually passed a resolution on Indian education policy in 1904, also sometimes known as Lord Curzon's education policy. And it was stated in the resolution that the shortcomings, this is a quote, the shortcomings of the present system in point of quality are well known. 4 out of 5 villages are without a school. 3 boys out of 4 grow up without an education, and only 1 girl in library attends any kind of school, unquote. The resolution pointed out that primary education had not received sufficient attention and it had not received its fair share of public funds. About primary education, the resolution pointed out that there was not sufficient attention being given to it, and that not enough public funds were made available. And notwithstanding the education resolution and the strong recommendations that it made, Gopal Krishnan Gokhale's bill that was introduced into the Legislative Assembly to make primary education free and compulsory for all was actually rejected, citing the dearth of funds. So as you can see, even though there were multiple policy statements all recommending strongly that education be given priority, continuous pressure to improve education from, by now, leading Indian activists led to a series of attempts to try and do so. And one of the most important reports around this time that we have was the Hartog Committee report. Among other things, this report underlined the problem of stagnation and wastage at the primary level and made strong suggestions for improving the quality of education, including by fixing the duration of the primary course to 4 years, consolidation instead of having multiple schools, and relating curricula and methodology to social conditions that existed at the time. Sadly, the Great Depression of the 1930s diluted the effect of many of these suggestions. After provincial autonomy was introduced in India in 1937, many steps were taken, such as the Wardha scheme, which passed a resolution for free and compulsory education for 7 years on a nationwide basis. The Sargent Plan called for free pre-primary education for children between the ages of 3 to 6, and universal and compulsory education from 6 to 11 years. Unfortunately, once again, the outbreak of the Second World War, the Bengal famine, and the focus on industry and agriculture in post-independent India didn't leave much space for focusing on education.